This is a crisis like no other, which means there is substantial uncertainty about the impact it will have on people's lives and livelihoods. A lot will depend on the epidemiology of the virus, the effectiveness of containment measures, and the development of therapeutics and vaccines, variables which are very hard to predict. In addition, many countries face multiple crises: a health crisis, a financial crisis, a collapse in commodity prices, especially for commodity exporters, and all of this interact in complex ways. Now, policymakers are responding in an unprecedented manner by helping households, firms, and financial markets. However, there is still considerable uncertainty about what the economic landscape will look like when we emerge from this lockdown. So now, under the assumption that the pandemic and required containment peaks in the second quarter in most countries in the world, and then recedes in the second half of this year, we are projecting global growth in 2020 to fall to minus 3%. Now, this is a downgrade of 6.3 percentage points from January 2020, a major revision over a very short period of time. This makes the Great Lockdown the worst recession since the Great Depression and far worse than the global financial crises. Assuming the pandemic fades in the second half of 2020 and that policy actions taken around the world are effective in preventing widespread firm bankruptcies, extended job losses, and system-wide financial strains, we project global growth in 2021 to rebound to 5.8%. Now, this recovery in 2021 is only partial, as the level of economic activity is projected to remain below the level we had projected for 2021 before the virus hit. The cumulative loss to global GDP over 2020 and 2021 from the pandemic crisis could be around $9 trillion, greater than the economies of Japan and Germany combined. Now, this is a truly global crisis, as no country is spared. Countries reliant on tourism, travel, and entertainment for their growth are experiencing major disruptions. Emerging market and developing economies face additional challenges. They face unprecedented reversals in capital flows, major currency pressures, while at the same time coping with weaker health systems and much lower fiscal space to support their economies. So for the first time since the Great Depression, both advanced economies and emerging and developing economies are in recession. For 2020, growth in advanced economies is projected at minus 6%. Emerging market and developing economies, which typically have normal growth levels well above advanced economies, are also projected to have negative growth of minus 1% and minus 2.2% if you exclude China. Now, income per capita is projected to shrink for over 170 countries. Now, we're projecting recoveries for both advanced economies and emerging and developing economies in 2021, but that, again, is partial. Now, what I have described is a baseline scenario. But given the extreme uncertainty around the duration and intensity of the health crises, we also explore alternative, more adverse scenarios. The pandemic may not recede in the second half of this year, leading to longer containment periods, worsening financial conditions, and further breakdowns in global supply chains. In such cases, global GDP will fall even further by an additional 3% in 2020. And if the health crisis rolls over into 2021, it can reduce the level of global GDP by an additional 8% compared to the baseline. Now, moving on to what are the important policy actions the countries need to take. Firstly, on the health front, flattening the spread of COVID-19 using lockdowns allows health systems to cope with this crisis. which then permits a resumption of economic activity. In this sense, there is no trade-off between saving lives and saving livelihoods. Countries should continue to generously support their health systems, perform widespread testing, and refrain from trade restrictions on medical supplies. A global effort must ensure that when therapies and vaccines are developed, both rich and poor nations alike have immediate access. Now, while the economy isn't shut down, policymakers will need to ensure that people are able to meet their basic needs and that businesses can pick up once the acute phases of the pandemic pass. The large, timely, and targeted fiscal, monetary, and financial policies already taken by many policymakers have been lifelines to households and businesses. This support should continue throughout the containment phase to minimize persistent scars that could emerge from subdued investment and job losses during this deep recession. Policymakers must also plan for the recovery. As containment measures come off, policies should shift swiftly to supporting demand, incentivizing firm hiring, and repairing balance sheets on private and public sectors to aid the recovery. Now, fiscal stimulus that is coordinated across countries that have fiscal space will magnify the benefits for all economies. Now, moratoria on debt payments and debt restructuring may need to be continued during the recovery phase. Now, multilateral cooperation is vital to the health of the global recovery. To support needed spending in developing countries, bilateral creditors and international financial institutions should provide concessional financing, grants, and debt relief. Collaborative effort is needed to ensure that the world does not deglobalize, so that the recovery is not damaged by further losses to productivity. At the International Monetary Fund, we are doing our part. We are actively deploying our $1 trillion lending capacity to support vulnerable countries, including through rapid dispersing emergency financing and debt service relief to our poorest member countries. And we are calling on official creditors to do the same. Now, there are some hopeful signs that this health crisis will end. Countries are succeeding in containing the virus using social distancing practices, testing, and contact tracing, at least for now. And treatments and vaccines may develop sooner than we expect. But in the meantime, we face tremendous uncertainty around what comes next. Commensurate with the scale and speed of the crises, domestic and international policy responses need to be large, rapidly deployed, and speedily recalibrated as new data becomes available. The courageous actions of doctors and nurses around the world need to be matched by policymakers so we can jointly overcome the crises. Thank you.